Okay, so the 8 paradoxes of great leadership, embracing the conflicting demands of today's workplace. So, just to give you all a little bit of background on how we came about, um, focusing on this book and having this as one of our portions of our learning series for this year and starting to do our planning for the 24-25 school year, Linda and I were looking at relevant topics for our schools. And it started as a conversation looking at how to address generational differences in the workplace. And as we started to investigate that a little bit, we came across Dr. Elmore's work on the 8 paradoxes of great leadership. And it really got us thinking not only about leading and working in modern times, but the challenges that brings to us, and also what traits and strategies leaders and people in the workforce need in order to be successful. So again, for those of you who weren't here with us at the beginning, I'm Linda Lazar, Leadership Development Consultant for Wayne Risa.
And welcome everyone. I'm Linda Kell, and I am the other leadership Linda here at Wayne Risa. So we are in charge of leadership development for our county.
And again, as I stated earlier, Dr. Elmore will be one of our speakers for our learning series. We have 4 outstanding national speakers that are coming, Dr. Perlman, Dr. Muhammad, and Miss Keisha Allen. And if you're interested in signing up for that learning series, we do have 2 cohorts. They run one Tuesday, one Wednesday normally. So if you are interested in registering for that, we do have the registration QR codes up for you. And we'll share them again at the end, so you'll be able to have them at that time. So Dr. Elmore starts the conversation with regard to the 8 paradoxes of leadership with the term pivot. And it goes back to the COVID-19 epidemic that happened. So what defines our current status the most with this term is that we were able to, in a very short amount of time, as educators and as a workforce, go from traditional school to virtual school almost overnight. And we were able to make that pivot and those changes. And so we're currently living in a time where those things happen constantly, whether it's mid-year budget cuts. You have your plan out, you've worked with your staff, you've decided what you're purchasing, what programs you're going to implement, and all of a sudden you get a mid-year memo that says, oops, budget cuts. The school year is going along great, everything's moving smoothly, you have an unexpected teacher leave, now you have a classroom without anybody to lead it. And what do you do? And maybe not just as an administrator in that situation, but also as the colleagues of that teacher who's not there anymore. Are you getting paid to work on your prep so that the kids can have a certified teacher and you're all working together as a team to fill that day in? In the time it takes to get a qualified sub to fill that in. New curriculum, we've all been there. I finally learned it. I feel comfortable. I'm implementing it. Things are great. Oops, we're getting a new curriculum, new leadership. I have a principal in my building. I've built a strong relationship with them. I know what they expect of me. And now I have a new administrator and I have to learn all of those things over again. School year is going smoothly. Something happens in the community and it's going to affect what we're doing in school. Same with social media. And so we're really in a place where we are constantly having to pivot, switch things up in order to continue forward. So what is a paradox? And we felt it was important just to take a couple seconds here to talk about the definition of a paradox. You can read it, it is on your screens, but essentially it's 2 opposing ideas that become a truth, right? Something is hot and cold at the same time. Well, how can that be? but you find out later, you know what, maybe it was. And so that's kind of the foundational piece here. We're going to be looking at traits that are essentially contradictory, but as leaders and as people in our workforces today, we have to be able to implement those opposing characteristics in order to be successful and know when to implement them, when to push them forward, and when to pull back from them. And so we're leading and working in times of disruption, like we talked about a little bit when we were talking about pivot. Those of you who've been on an interview recently for a new position or a new job, I know at least in the administrative ones, they like to ask this particular question. Sometimes in the teaching interviews, they'll ask you the question, right? There's a fight going on here, a fire starts here, somebody is calling, what do you do first, right? And they're looking to gauge at how you prioritize. Well, that interview question is not very far from the reality that we're all living today. And Dr. Elmore cites a term called, or an acronym, VOCA, that is used in a police academy to describe our times. They are volatile. Our realities are subject to change at any time. They are uncertain, where even our most effective leaders are not sure what's coming next. People used to pride themselves on their ability to forecast, right? When you were running an organization and look ahead. And we're in a time now where that's not so easy to do anymore. Our times are complex. Not only are we facing tough challenges, but those challenges are constantly evolving. And even when we think we're facing the same challenge again, everything around us has changed so much that we can't approach the solution to that challenge in the same way anymore. And they're very ambiguous. The answers are fuzzy. There's a lack of clarity about the way forward. And we really need to, think about how we can reach that sense of clarity when things are volatile and uncertain and complex at the same time. So, what we want you to think about now is in the last 12 months in your educational role, which of these terms could describe some of the experiences that you had? And just go ahead and pick one that you feel is relevant and drop it in the chat box. I see complex, volatile. Yeah. Complex and ambiguous seem to be taking over there. And it's very true to the times we're living in now.
So as we look at those different descriptions and you think about, which one of those are positive, which one of those makes you feel like, wow, I'm doing great. I'm in a volatile situation, or I'm really uncertain what's going to happen next, or ooh, this is really complex. And that is why really they're saying that a lot of people right now are leaving leadership. And I don't think that's a surprise to any of you. When you think about it and you hear about really when we work with leaders, they'll say, I've got 2 years and 6 months left to go. And I'm thinking, oh, don't waste away your 2 years like that. But we have a lot of people leaving leadership, and we're finding because of the things that we're going to be talking about today, leading is hard. So I'm just going to tell you, when we talk leaders today, we're talking teachers in a classroom. You are the leader of your classroom. We will talk about students as leaders. Students should be leaders in your buildings. So when we say the word leadership or leaving leadership, we're not just talking about our leaders. We're also talking about our staff. We're talking about our students, our teachers. And it's because of those different principles that we just looked at. So as you look through these little facts here, and we think about, wow, we've got nearly half of our superintendents planning to leave their positions in the next couple of years. Do we have a pipeline created to fill that in of qualified people? And if you think about when we had those years of the pandemic, it said more than 1 in 10 principals left the profession. So when we start thinking about pipelines and leadership pipelines, and are we encouraging our teachers to participate in leadership training? Are we becoming better leaders ourselves because we need people to come fill those superintendent roles? So we'll have to think about that leaving leadership. And a big piece of it is emotional intelligence. And it was interesting because Linda and I had a conversation with Dr. Elmore the other day, and he said what he believes the biggest key to leadership is having emotional intelligence. And when you think about emotional intelligence, what they're talking about is the ability for you to manage your own emotions and notice, and it's not just taking care of yourself, it's understanding the emotions of the people around you. So not just plowing through with your own thoughts, but as I'm considering things, I'm in tune with my own thoughts and also thinking about, all right, what's Darcy thinking about? What's Linda thinking about? What's Kate thinking about? So I'm processing those at the same time. I can't let my mind get so distracted that I can't focus on what I'm doing, but what I'm doing is really thinking about what are others thinking? How could I be a step ahead? But stay present in the moment. And when they talk about emotional intelligence, there are 5 key elements, and they talk about being self-aware, self-regulating, personal motivation, so wanting to do well, empathy, and social skills. And I'm just going to put a little plug in for some of the trauma and social emotional work we do at RISA. Those pieces are key that we're talking to our students about them. And I know you're saying, like, oh, Linda, I'm not sure we got time for that. We don't have time to teach those things. And I'm going to say, how can we not? I believe our goal from when we get our first youngest babies in pre-K up through 12 or the other levels that we offer, we want to create successful, independent adults. And what person can be successful without a shred of emotional intelligence, without being able to self-regulate, without being personally motivated to do something? So it's really important that we consider emotional intelligence our own and cultivate it if it's something we need to work on. And also think about, are we teaching it to our students at the level that they need it? So on the left there on your screen, you can see signs of emotional intelligence. And these are straight from Dr. Elmore's book. But you're thinking about feelings, which was that piece I was talking about. You're considering what other people are thinking. You control your own thoughts. I know sometimes I struggle with that, right? Your thoughts can run away. You wake up at 4 a.m. and all of a sudden you're kind of processing what's happening and what's going on. But you have to have that ability to control your thoughts. You have to be authentic. So be yourself all the time, not because a group wants you to be a certain way. You're not going to say or do something for that. I love this one, you pause. And I think we need to give ourselves grace as educators because sometimes we don't pause because we are living our work and professional life on this treadmill where we're just going, putting out fires, taking care of this, taking care of that. And you're not taking a breath. You're not taking a breath to reflect. Something happens. And before you even know it, you're saying things and doing things that you probably should have taken a breath a second and thought about. You need to be empathetic. A big one, you apologize. And sometimes it's hard for leaders because we feel like we're responsible. We're supposed to know everything. We are not. We are human just as everyone else. So when you think about as you lead in your classroom, as you lead in a building or a district, apologizing, forgiving, helping, that's okay. And saying, you know what, I am sorry. I thought I had, made the right decision and it didn't work out well. That's okay. And lead with confidence with that. So when we think about, what's a paradoxical leader, and all these slides are from Dr. Elmore's book, 8 Paradoxes. But when we think about what a paradoxical leader is, and it's basically someone that, or something where you are looking at those two sides. And I know Linda spoke about it a little bit. And at first you think, oh, that can't happen. You can't be both a visible and an invisible leader at the same time. But what they're saying is to be a good leader, you have to lead through paradoxes. You have to know when to be out there and when to step back. And when we're thinking of paradoxes, an example that they had in the book was talking about COVID-19 in Atlanta. Normally, there's a lot of car accidents there, very busy, trafficy. But what they found was during the pandemic, there were actually more car accidents with less cars on the road. What do you think? Why do you think that actually happened? Someone come off mute, throw it in the chat. Why do you think there were more accidents during the pandemic than when there were actually more cars on the road at previous times? I know there's a voice out there. What do you think? Why do you think there were more accidents with less cars?
This is Angela Prini here. Can you hear
Thanks,
me?
Andy. Yep,
Okay.
perfect. Thank you.
So I'm just thinking that people were more self-centered and, we were all nervous and scared, so they weren't focused about the safety of others, just themselves.
Great. Thanks for sharing that, Angela. So thinking more about ourselves instead of thinking about the whole bigger picture. Anyone else? What do you think? Less cars on the road, more accidents. And that happened in many cities, not just Atlanta. One more guess? I want you to think about when you're driving in your neighborhood. Are you paying more attention to your driving when you're in your neighborhood or when you're on a really busy freeway? And what they were saying was that it sounds like it shouldn't happen. Less cars on the road should be less accidents, but a paradox would be less cars on the road, more accidents. And what they found was it was because people were not paying as much attention. If you are in a hugely trafficy area, you're going to go ahead and pay way more attention, maybe be less apt to pick up your phone, which we never should be picking up, of course, but looking at things like that. So that's what a paradox is. And a paradoxical leader has to be able to, number one, realize that the paradox exists. And then number two, be able to work in and through either side of that paradox. So on the left-hand side, it talks about a paradoxical leader test of first-rate intelligence, and this was by F. Scott Fitzgerald, is the ability to hold two opposed ideas in mind at the same time and still functioning. So I am going to be able to think about myself as a confident person, but also humble at the same time. And right now I'm telling you some of those paradoxes. I'm able to think about myself as visible and invisible and understand the powers of both. And when they talk about paradoxical leaders, they call them uncommon leaders because, quite frankly, they're skills that you're not born with, you need to work at, and you need to learn about. So uncommon leaders have the ability to read a situation, notice before they lead a situation. Because of that treadmill I was talking about, sometimes we get on there and we start leading the situation and we're like, ooh, did we take a second to pause to see how people are reacting? What are their emotions? How many people do I have in the room? Who is this actually affecting? So paradoxical leaders are uncommon. They're able to think of these paradoxes at the same time and kind of reflect upon the powers of both while they're happening. And then also observing and doing a lot of observing and pausing before actually jumping into their actual actions. So with that, we're going to kind of just go quickly through the 8 paradoxes. We don't have a lot of time with you, but just know that Dr. Lazar and I are working on offering all different kind of levels of this with teachers, with leaders throughout the school year because of its popularity, quite frankly. So the first paradox that Dr. Elmore talks about is confidence and humility. And when you think about that, you're thinking about, well, can I be humble and confident at the same time? And they're saying you need to be that uncommon, effective leader. When we think about leaders, reality changes quickly. Those were those pieces that Dr. Lazar mentioned earlier, right? When we are in volatile and ever-changing situations, we have to lead with confidence, but we also need to be able to understand and recognize that that reality is changing. So that makes us kind of step back and think about, well, lead with confidence, but I need to be humble and let people know I don't know everything. right? Even if I felt like I knew everything at that exact moment, something else is coming up, something else new will happen. So in order to be a confident and humble leader, we need to learn to ask questions, do a lot more listening than talking, and look to really add value to a situation, not gain value from it. And I think that's a big piece with leadership. Are you in leadership to climb a ladder? You know what? That's totally fine. If your ultimate goal perhaps is to be a superintendent, great. But as you lead in your situations, make sure you're not leading with the thought, I am here to gain my own value, gain my experience. Take your leadership and think about, I am going to add value to this situation, which will make you really function as a better leader. So if we look at the two premises of confidence and humility, I thought a big piece that Dr. Elmore said is they're both contagious. You want everyone you're working with to be confident. I am talking every single employee in your school to be confident. Your front office secretaries, you want custodians, lunch ladies, you want everyone to feel confident in the role that they're taking in your school, but also do that in a way that's humble and accepting and open. If we don't lead with this, and we're talking in our classroom, in our schools, in our districts, we're not going to be very effective. We're not going to be that uncommon leader because no one wants to have a leader that isn't confident, but also nobody wants to have a leader that isn't humble. So when we think about those two pieces, that's that paradox. But how can I lead confidently, but with humility? How can I teach in my classroom confidently, but also show and model to students that humility? And then taking it that next step, do I let my students do that? Do I show that they're confident learners, but also teach them that being a humble learner, right? When they get that test back, when they're answering questions, when they're listening to a classmate, maybe not to give the same answer, are they humble about their own learning, which allows everyone to have a safe space in that classroom?
And that leads us to our next paradox, which is being able to leverage both vision and blind spots. And when we think of having a vision, we tend to think of, you know what, we have direction, we have a clear target, we know where we're going, and we're energizing our team to get there. And what happens a lot of times when we don't have vision is it leads to maintaining protocol, right? You're just managing people and situations, and maintaining the status quo. So it's extremely important to have vision in order to strive to go forward and continue to reach our targets and improve. When we talk about blind spots, what Dr. Elmore relates blind spots to is rookie smarts. And what that means is it's not that we can't see or that we don't have a vision, but it's not knowing what you don't know, right? It's where our creativity comes from. It's where our unconventional solutions come from because we don't know any better. So if we look here at the visual, I pulled a visual that to me kind of really illustrated this. You have two paths, and let's just say they're both leading to this spot right here up front. And one of them is a very straight and direct path, and the other one is the road less traveled. And those rookies are going to take that road less traveled. And there's something to be learned from that. When, we're looking at those unconventional solutions, it's ensuring that we're not leaving any stone unturned, that we're, going to look and ensure that we've taken in every possibility and every possible great idea. And again, going back to not knowing what we don't know. You're coming in as the new teacher. You have this great idea, and sometimes, like you didn't know any better. You don't have the knowledge of this is how it's always done. And so you're able to kind of bring fresh eyes to something. And that's what the Rookie Smarts is all about. So we want to have vision, we want to have those targets, but we also want to go into it with that motivation of not being afraid of the barriers because we don't know what the barriers are. So we're going to push forward and step up to that challenge and continue to be motivated. And that's what those blind spots allow us to do.
So our next paradox we're going to talk about is visibility and invisibility. And as I'm talking about this, I want you to really think about an example where both were important to have. Things that they say is really it's important that sometimes we step up and then sometimes we need to step back so that others step up, right? As leaders, sometimes we think we need to solve every problem, work through everything. We have to be there every second. If I'm not there, things aren't going smoothly. And I want you to really reflect on that if you're a building leader. Are you having teachers? Are your support staff? Are your paraprofessionals able to step up when you need to step back? We all need to step back a little bit, right? Leaders, you cannot go 100 miles an hour, 12, 14 hours a day and never be able to kind of step back and look for some really nice, relaxing things happening in your buildings, in your classroom. So it's really important that we're able to do those pieces. You also need to think about with teaching, right? We kind of do this. Great teachers do this all the time, right? When you think about gradual release, right? I am going to work with you. I'm going to be very visible as a teacher. I'm right up front here. We're working with it together. Then I step back a little bit, and right? And then we do it together. And then I kind of become invisible. And I'm not asking you to become invisible in your classroom, but if you think about it, step back, right? And allow them to have that productive struggle. So in our roles as teachers, we need to be a really visible up front, but not always a sage on the stage. Do we allow our students to step up and you step back and let them lead the classroom? We know that's an effective way to learn. We know that learning happens when we're doing, not when we're just sitting there always listening. So I'd like to take a second. We do want to hear from, we're going to say 3 people. Everyone, let's jump on in, hear some voices, maybe even turn on your camera so we can see your faces. When was a time where you had to be, or you watched someone gracefully be visible and invisible? Or I'm going to say the exact opposite. When was a time when someone should have stepped back, or someone should have been invisible or more visible? And how did you feel about that? So let's have 3 people share.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you, Nathaniel.
Yeah, no problem. So, um, right now, I have a long-term sub in for my co-teacher. So what I'm doing is I'm being visible by helping her with a lot of stuff, like showing her the lessons that we do, showing her the curriculum. But I'm also stepping back and giving her that space to be creative in her own right, to just hone in her skills as being a teacher as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing that. So as you lead as a teacher with another coworker, that's awesome that you're helping that person flex and have a role for being, sometimes we need to be a little invisible, especially in a role that we're new at, because we need to just step back and take a breath and not kind of be in the limelight. So that's great that you're doing that. Thanks, Nathaniel. How about our volunteer number 2?
I feel like this is something I end up having to do a lot with my students. I work in a center-based program for post-secondary students,
Mhm.
and I run a culinary arts program. So at the beginning of the year, when we're opening up our restaurant, it is a lot of direct modeling for the students, walking them to the table, going through the script with them, and then over time, I'm able to step back and almost not even be in the room towards the end of the year as they can run the restaurant on their own. But so just setting those expectations and modeling it for them and then stepping back and being less visible.
Perfect. Thanks, Caitlin. And that's really a great kind of mantra to start our year, right? If we spend the time now, if we're laying our expectations, being very visible, setting clear expectations, it's going to make for us later be able to step back and say, wow, look what we've done, and be a little bit invisible. Thanks, Caitlin. How about one more volunteer? I was a middle school math teacher. I have pretty good wait time, just so you know. Is there one more person, even a time when you felt like someone should have been a little bit more invisible? They were a little bit too visible.
Hi.
Hi, Melanie. Thank you.
I have, I'm a special education ASD teacher, and with my young ones, I think it's a delicate dance to be both present and then also to step back, talk about wait time, to be giving them that space in order to do what they need to do and to accomplish a task with not too much oversight.
Perfect. Thank you, Melanie. And also thanks for lifting the age piece, right? We need to be a little more visible in certain situations. And sometimes we can be a little less visible at those times.
Yeah.
So our next paradox is how to be both stubborn and open-minded at the same time. And so in reading this portion of the text, it reminded me of an example back when I was a building principal. And we all know school traffic is chaos before and after school. And so this administrator had the brilliant idea of saying that we were going to enforce one-way traffic during pickup and drop off. And, part of that was being out there during that time and watching my walkers cross the street. And there was a lot of heart dropping, like, look out, stop, wait. And it was a huge safety issue. And I think that was one thing we could all agree on. So we go to start implementing this great idea. Everybody kind of recognized the fact that it was needed. But then we find out police can't enforce it. So we're on our own. It required a lot of staff involvement, and parents had to be cooperative, right? And I think by the end of it all, regardless of what the challenges were, the staff knew that this was a non-negotiable. Parents eventually learned that this was not negotiable. The fact that we were going to have one-way traffic was my point of being stubborn. How we did it was where there was a lot of open-mindedness. The original plan was brought to the staff. This is what I have so far. What do you think? And at that point, being very open to different ideas, being very open to what everybody else was going to contribute to that. And so if we look at the side by side between the stubborn and the open-mindedness, we see that a lot of times the people that we are leading, whether it's the student in our classrooms, our staff, the parents in our community, they need to see us as tenacious. They want to know that we're someone who is going to stick to our decisions, that we have conviction, that they can rely on us when things get challenging because those obstacles are not going to stop us. And at the same time, they allow everybody to see, like I said, what our non-negotiables are. The students in the classrooms really need to know what your non-negotiables are, where those lines, are drawn, that this is okay, you know what? I know I can't get away with this. And it impacts greatly our classroom management and our school management. Whereas the open-mindedness is, you know what? Yes, I'm tenacious and yes, I'm stubborn, but I'm still teachable. And my team knows that. They know that I'm going to be open to listen to their ideas. My students know, and how many of us at the beginning of the school year, we've kind of moved away from here are the classroom rules to the non-negotiable. The stubbornness is we have to have classroom rules, right? The openness is let's make these rules together. What do you as the students think we need to have a productive classroom, right? And those things can be adaptable, they can change. And when we are open-minded, that makes us less likely to miss out on opportunities because we're not being, so closed-minded that there's only one way to do things. And perhaps the point that Dr. Elmore made that really, really stuck out to me was when you're stubborn, you have a shot at reaching your goal, right? You're going to stick to it. You're not going to let obstacles stop you. You're going to go for it. But when you're open-minded, you have a shot at taking other leaders with you. And so if we circle back a little bit to that one-way traffic example, My teachers were leading that charge. I had parents volunteering to come and stand at different corners and lead that charge. I no longer had to be the leader of that because there was a whole team of leaders all around that building stepping up and coming along for that ride, right? And taking ownership of that, initiative to try and keep kids safe. And so, really, how do we balance those two things?
Thanks, Linda. So our next paradox we're looking at is one that is super important to have skills in when we're going through a hardship, when we're going through something that is very emotional, something that is high stakes, kind of like a crucial conversation, right? We need to be as uncommon leaders in classrooms, in our schools, in our districts, deeply personal, but also inherently collective. And really what they're talking about is, can you look at the big picture, but also get people to kind of move in behind you and move in with you? It's kind of like that piece, a whole is a sum of its parts, right? So if we have to think about the whole, but if we don't cultivate the pieces of it, that whole is going to crumble away or fall apart. So when we think about this, like from a teacher perspective, I was thinking, it would be like teaching a lesson on fractions to your classroom. And all you're thinking about is, I'm teaching my lesson on fractions. We're going to do common denominators today, and that's what we're going to do. And then every time a student asks a question or raise their hand, if you're not going to be deeply personal, you're going to just keep answering with the same thing, whether it's answering their question or not, because I'm just doing it for the group. I'm having it for the group. That's frustrating, right? We know kids get frustrated that way. And I think us as adults, we get frustrated when a leader or a situation is inherently collective and we're feeling like we're not getting that support. No one's really seeing me, right? I know when they talk and when Linda and I work with our leaders, like we'll say, don't send out an email saying, everyone needs to get their grades in on time. They're not in on time. Okay, if it's 2 people out of your 30 people in your staff, go to those 2 people. No one wants to get told on that collective view, especially when it's something where we're asking for a change. So when we're thinking about deeply personal, inherently collective, what Dr. Elmore talked about is social intelligence. And social intelligence is a subset of that emotional intelligence that I was talking earlier about. And that is really the capacity to navigate complex relationships or environments. And I was kind of reflecting on this, thinking, what isn't this day and age a complex social environment, right? I don't think anyone's walking into any educational role and thinking on a professional level, wow, this isn't a complex environment. This is really simple. Everyone's thinking the same. Everyone wants to do the same thing. It's just not the way it is, whether I'm leading in a building, leading in a classroom. Every student doesn't get excited about the same thing. So having social intelligence is that ability to be able to kind of flex back and forth. Can you think about what all your students are thinking about this lesson and make sure that you're offering something for those students that need a little more activity, something for the students that need to work with others and loves that, something that's awesome for those that want to work on their own. And we know that's the mark of a good educator, right? We are able to flex through different situations. We're able to motivate people through different situations and get them to learn. I'm sure we've all been in a situation, whether it's a, elementary, middle, high school, college situation, us personally, where we just felt like, wow, this professor, this teacher, they just don't get it, right? They don't care about me. They're just standing up there teaching whatever. They have no idea that we're lost. They have no idea that they're going too quickly. They have no idea if we're even paying attention. So if you think about those things, that social intelligence is a huge piece with leading. If you look on the screen, Dr. Elmore gave a little bit of a kind of a definition or a summary of what is social intelligence. And if you were looking to better your leadership skills, and again, when I say leadership skills, I am talking whatever role you hold, how could I make myself better in that role? You need to think about these 7 pieces that you see on the screen. Am I being socially aware? Now, I know that some students, right, or sometimes when we have people with special needs, right, they don't have all of that social awareness. But I want you to think about, could you be more socially aware? Are you aware of who's connecting and who's not? And right, kind of that goes along with that is that attunement. That's kind of recognizing, are you aware of someone's emotions, right? Because we have a lot of people that hide emotions. Right. We go through, especially as educators, we act like nothing's wrong. Maybe we've had the worst morning. We show up at work, and what are we supposed to do? Put that smiley face on and greet our classrooms, put that smiley face on and greet our teachers. And that's a piece that we have to think about. Do we have staff in our buildings with a friend that person would be able to go to and say, wow, Linda, I had a horrible morning? Because that makes me feel better if I have that. In fact, I show up to work at a much higher level, Gallup poll once said. Another piece is synchronization. And I want you to think about in a classroom situation that drives teachers crazy, right? Everyone is working quietly, and then you have that one child that is not synchronized to the emotions of others, kind of, has a meltdown, flies off the handle a little bit. So we have to think about, as leaders, if students are all up in arms about something that happened in the hallway, do we just say, all right now, let's go, let's get back to work? Which that's part of our job, but we know now with brain research, if they're still emotionally charged about what happened in the hallway, and we just say, let's get right back to work, their brain will continue to cycle and reflect on that. So that third one, synchronization, is something to really think about as you enter in this 2024-2025 school year. Next one, they call primal empathy, which is just, are you able to feel what other people feel? I know we can't walk in someone else's shoes, but are you able to understand and listen and allow them to explain to you, this is what's happening? And when I say listen without your biases. Listen and really hear how they're feeling, whether we think they should feel that way or not, listening to their perception. Do you have concern or genuine compassion? Do you have self-presentation? That was one I hadn't really heard too much before, but do you believe in others? Or do you think you are that, drum major, the leader of the band, and I don't know, I'm just going to take care of it myself because I can do it faster, right? I know a lot of building leaders feel that way. I'm not going to ask teachers to take the lead on this. I'm not going to step back and be invisible on this because, well, I'm not sure they could get it done anyway. I'm the one that can get it done. Think about self-presentation in your classroom. Do your other students believe that the other students have significance in the classroom? Or is it this group of 10 out of the 30 in your room actually has significance? And finally, socially intelligent leaders have influence. And I loved how the wording was wisely move. I was trying to save some words and I thought, I can't take that word out. Able to wisely move people in a collaborative direction. Not through carrots and sticks and enticements, but what's the most wise or the best way to get people to the place that we need to get to.
So the next paradox is to be a teacher and a learner. And I want you, as we go through this slide, to think a little bit about what Linda just said about self-presentation. And that's really where this connection is going to come in. In that self-presentation piece, she touched on the fact that you need to believe in others' potential and significance. And so in order to remain a learner while you are a teacher, you have to have emotional security and be able to master your self-awareness and your self-management. Because if you don't have those two things, then you're holding in a lot of insecurity. And when you're insecure, you tend to become very defensive about your own past ideas because you're not open to hearing new ones. And you become very threatened when the people around you have better ideas than you do. And if you're in that place, you can't take on the role of learner. You become very closed off to it. And so how do we practice being a teacher and a learner? What are the key components to that? We can reverse mentor. We can set a goal to learn something new every week or every month. And then we need to establish a time for personal and professional growth. And as educators, whenever we think of attending a professional development, it's, oh no, I can't be out of the building. Oh no, I can't be away from my classroom. But we really need to, if we want to be teachers and learners, give ourselves the time to be a learner so that we can come back and be the teacher, right? So it moves both ways. And so the fourth practice that Dr. Elmore um, speaks to in his book really summarizes that give and take. In order to be a teacher and a learner, when you learn something new, go back and share it. And so that's going to bring us to our discussion question that is up right now. How do we intentionally create opportunities to allow our students and or our staff to take on the role of teacher? And so I'm going to ask, and we'll go with three. So let's try to get three, or, throw it in the chat. Let's go back to when you've learned or done something new, share it. When have you intentionally created opportunities? Share how you did that.
I used to teach a Civil War unit, and I would have students pick either an important person, an important document, an important battle, and they would actually teach the class about that person, place, or thing before I ever would talk about it. So students then are kind of taking the lead on teaching, and then I would come back later and cover any details that they may have missed. But they took on the role first of teaching the class about the Civil War unit.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I also see peer collaboration and team teaching, an aspect of the lesson in the chat box. Thank you for sharing that, Melanie.
Hey, Peter, I was just going to ask you a question. Did you find engagement or motivation in your class different when you ran like your lessons or your units that way versus you more as the teacher at the like all the time?
Oh yeah, kids got excited, definitely, because I kind of presented it as the way as you guys are teaching. Like you guys are going to be the teachers, and I gave them a lot of freedom to take it where they wanted to, and they a lot of freedom with how they wanted to present their person, place, or thing. So they got excited taking on the new role, definitely.
Thanks, Peter.
I've had students that have expressed a job goal of being a manager somewhere. So that has been something that we've then translated into the classroom where we expect them to master a certain area or a certain role within our kitchen and then be able to teach it to other students and work as a pseudo manager for those other students in that role.
And Caitlin, can you speak like when they have that role, do you see anything different in their body language, the way they speak, or anything like that?
It's tremendous. The confidence, they're way more patient with other students than they typically would be. I often use it too as a behavioral management tool for a student where if they're having a tough time in a certain area of the day, I'll say, hey, remember at 1 o'clock, I need you managing the dish tank. And it switches everything around and it can be a great behavior management tool as well.
Thanks, Caitlin. Anyone else?
And so I will circle back really quickly because I did see in the chat that we have some aspiring leaders in this group and some coordinators. And I love the examples that we shared about what you all are doing with your students in your classrooms and really giving them that ownership and that opportunity to shine and lead amongst their peers. And so really quickly, some of the things we've already done in this brief 5 minutes are things that leaders and administrators can do with their staff, which is providing staff at a staff meeting, just like we did now. 3 people share something that you've tried or done in your classroom that you can share with others. And so that is allowing our staff to, certain staff members to step up as the teachers in that setting while the other staff is learning from them. And, one more thing we can take from that to tie back to establishing the time for personal and professional growth. As you can tell, I'm kind of really passionate about working with our Wayne future leaders. So if any of you in here We do offer that cohort as well for our Wayne Future Leaders. But again, it's, how do we carve that time out for our staff to show them that we think it's important for them to have time to develop professionally? And a key time that we can take advantage of is our staff meetings and a commitment to dedicate that for learning versus updates. And, committing to that as a staff where that time is going to be dedicated to professional learning versus things I could have shared in a memo, right? And so for those of you who kind of are looking at this through that lens, those are some strategies and ideas that can help both you take on the teacher learner role and your staff take that role on as well.
So we're moving on. This is our 7th paradox, so we're almost there, and we will get you out of here on time. And that is high standards and gracious forgiveness. And sometimes we think those can't peacefully coexist, but that's what's great about this book. When they talk about high standards and gracious forgiveness, they say, we want people in a productivity contest, but not a popularity contest, right? We're not all worried and self-absorbed about, am I getting the credit? Am I setting the high standards? And if you don't meet that, well, then I'm going to let you know that you're not meeting my standard. That's not high standards and gracious forgiveness. What they say is set the high standard, celebrate when we even move towards the standard. And we don't do that enough in schools, classrooms, as leaders. If you don't meet the goal, that's all right. That's a conversation. That's gracious forgiveness. You keep modeling that and say, but look what we did accomplish. Sometimes we have goals set for us even by the state with certain testing that we feel like, okay, that's impossible. That's never going to happen. But do we take a second and celebrate the movement that we do have? We have students that come to school every day and have these high standards set for them. And they're trying to get there, but do the teachers ever give them a little forgiveness and say, hey, maybe you didn't quite get to what we're looking for yet, but look at what you did. Look at what you accomplished. So it's really important that we think about, as teachers, do we allow in our classrooms, do we allow kids to try it, talk it over? If it doesn't quite work, all right, right? It's kind of like that sun will come out tomorrow kind of piece. Like, do we make it be so high stakes in our classrooms, in our schools? The standards are so high, teachers are stressed out because they feel like, I don't know if I can meet that, and never really show them the grace and space that they need. And I think sometimes that's hard as leaders because we have people that we are leading, especially building leaders, that we feel like nobody's ever giving us gracious forgiveness. So teachers that are on this call, your leaders, your building leaders, they are humans just like you are. And as they're being held to a high standard or holding you to a high standard, are you still giving them whatever humans need, a little bit of gracious forgiveness?
And the last paradox in the book, and that we will talk about today, is how are you both timely and timeless? And really, this is the art of connecting the past to the present and then connecting the present to the future. And the metaphor Dr. Elmore used for this was the swing. The farther you go back, the higher you swing forward. And it's really keeping that pendulum in mind of how do we honor and learn from the past, but continue to imagine and strive for what we want the preferred future to be. You're the new staff member, you're the new administrator in the building. Sometimes we come to those roles with so much energy and gumption, and yes, we have to do this. But let me tell you, if you take the time to learn about the honored traditions in that new space and embrace those and incorporate them in the vision of the future, you will go forward a lot faster than if you try to just come in and hit the ground running. And Dr. Elmore used in his book a lot of references to Walt Disney in this section. And if you think about it, Disney was the master of this. If you go to one of the theme parks, right, there's Main Street and Frontierland that are all tied to the past, but then you walk a couple more steps and now you're in Tomorrowland, right? And so it's that ability to really marry and honor where we've been with where we are, and taking that to drive us to where we're going to be.
So with that, Linda and I would like to thank you for your time today. If you want a chance to see Dr. Elmore, there's 2 opportunities at Wayne Reese. So we already talked about Learning Series for Leaders. And then I know we have quite a few deans of students, teachers on here. If you are an aspiring administrator, we do have a few slots left for our Wayne Future Leaders Initiative. We've had some real success with people in the Wayne Future Leaders Initiative of last year already being hired. Quite a few of them have leadership roles. So if that's something that you're thinking about, please reach out to us and we can have a conversation with you about that. So thank you so much for spending an hour of your time with us. Have a wonderful school year this year, whether you're already in the thick of it or just starting, but reach out to us for any support. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a great evening, everybody.